Welcome to Season 2 of the Shop Stool Podcast, a podcast for woodworkers and the maker community in general. With Joey Chalk from King Post Timberworks, Bryan Cush from Sawdust Bureau, and Robin Lewis from RobinLewisMakes. Hi everyone, I hope you're all very well. This is episode 12, Season 2 of the Shop Stool Podcast. As always, I want to start by introducing my two co-hosts. Joey, how are you?
Very good, how are you?
Yeah, not too bad. And Bryan, how's it going?
I'm doing great, guys. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. And my name is Robin Lewis. Welcome to the show, everyone. Now, today we're also joined by a very special guest, and it's one of our guests that I know, at least I am certainly going to learn a lot from. He's an architect and furniture designer from Melbourne, but he spent a lot of time studying all over the world. He's won a number of awards for his work, so you know he's legit, and he has a strong belief in the design process, which is something we're going to get into a little bit later on. So welcome to the show, Adam Markowitz. Thanks very much for being here today. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. It's always cool to have people with sort of that high-end level on the show, because we sort of reach out to such a diverse range of people, and we've had guests from all sort of walks of woodworking, from the content creator side to, as I say, like you with that real high-end design. It's an interesting flair on the show, an interesting side for the show. So I guess a good place to start, Adam Markowitz, where did you come from? What's the story? How did you get to where you are today?
All right. So I actually did a little bit of woodworking when I was a kid. There was a program called Learning by Doing, where you would I think I would have been 9 or 10, and you go in and you make little bits of wood. And there's this great photo that's on my I think it's on my mum's desk at home, and it's just me in a workshop. And I don't think she would have guessed that in 20 years time I'd be doing pretty much the same thing. I didn't expect to be doing woodworking. I signed up to become an architect, similar to Bryan, and we actually went through the same course, and we actually crossed paths with the same mentor, who was the teacher, Hamish Hill. And that was in the master's program at the University of Melbourne. It's sort of an elective that you do in the architecture school, where you build a piece of furniture. And I, just really, really enjoyed that. But it still at the time didn't cross my mind that I was going to be a fine woodworker. I sort of expected I was going to be on the straight and narrow to being an architect. So I graduated, got a job, and just hated it. I just really, really hated it.
as an architect. So a job as an architect, right?
Yeah, and it was a range of things. It wasn't up to anything in particular, or the practice I was at, or the particular work I was doing. It was mainly just being in an office environment didn't agree with me. Just counting down the time, the whole concept of hump day, where you're just waiting for the week to
Monday
go past, and just, the questions are like, oh, what have you got for lunch today? It just couldn't take it. What'd you do on the weekend? The kind of conversation where like neither party is interested in the conversation, but it just happens.
that office banter.
Yeah, no, I couldn't hack it. And I was doing evening classes in woodworking just as a sort of hobby thing. In the evenings, actually.
Where were you doing those, Adam?
I was actually doing it just over there at the Woodworkers Association.
You've come a long way.
Yeah. I was taking classes here, and the teacher there had trained in Hobart in Tasmania, and it was really clear to me as I was working as an architect, and it's, as I've heard Bryan sort of go through with his history, it can be a real shit fight, the architecture It can be really challenging. You come up with a design, and there's sort of a million different parties that want to pull it in different ways. You've got developers and clients and engineers and town planners, and they all, pull it this way and that. And it's not uncommon that at the end you've got this sort of Frankenstein of a building that you don't really love, and
And that design, are you talking from the perspective of you've just come up with this design, or it's from a client's brief?
From a brief, and you're working with a team, so it's not especially where I was. I was at the bottom of the firm, so it's sort of it wasn't specifically my design, but you could just see, the architectural process it's minimum 2 to 3 years from start to finish, and it's not common for people to stay in a job for that long, so you really don't see things to completion very often. And it would just contrast really strongly with what I was doing in the evenings, which is I'd have an idea and I could actually come up with it and make it into reality with my own two hands. And I just found it so much more satisfying. So after talking to that teacher at the Woodworkers Association, where I'm currently leasing these days, I just packed my bag and packed my car. And there's a ferry here that leaves from Port Melbourne and it goes to Tasmania. So I caught the Spirit of Tasmania across with sort of no real plan. But I'd enrolled in a graduate diploma of furniture design at the University of Tassie down in Hobart, which is
so that would be a plan, I guess.
Yeah, it's a plan. I
subliminal plan.
Yeah, no. Look, I knew that I was going to go do furniture design. I didn't have a place to stay. I booked into a backpackers for about 3 weeks until I found a place, and it was just like it just all happened in a hurry. And then suddenly I found myself sleeping on an inflated mattress in freezing cold Hobart. And
lap of luxury,
and just having the time of my life. It was fantastic. Because the thing with Hobart is that there's a real taste for craft down there. There's a real appreciation of the fine timbers, and their industry. Like you still go down to the markets, and look, a lot of it's pretty kind of daggy little gifts, but it's still, you got the cheese knives and the little bandsaw boxes and things, but it's still front and center woodworking, and the idea of hue and pine and the timbers there, it's very integral into the mentality there. So yeah, I really, really had a great time. And at the time, so it was a postgraduate degree, and the university had co-located with the Polytechnic. So I was able to enroll at the same time with a whole bunch of Polytechnic classes. So I was sort of getting simultaneous kind of design training and TAFE level training, which was really handy. And through that, like I sort of learned how to do, tune up planes and cut dovetails to a limited extent. I wasn't there for a super long time. But what I managed to do was I realized that the architecture school had a relationship with the design school in Copenhagen. So I kind of tried to arrange something under the radar where I could go, because I was at the fine arts school. The furniture school was part of the fine arts school, and the architecture school in Denmark was related to the design school in Denmark. So I kind of fudged some things on a form and no one really checked. And sort of ended up sort of 6 months later on a plane heading to Copenhagen. And I was enrolled in the design school at the Royal Academy there. Which is really amazing. But the thing that I kind of had visions of becoming a Danish cabinet maker as I was on the plane going over there, and showed up, and it wasn't the case. It was very design focused and very strict and rigorous design training. but there wasn't much focus on the making. And I was really drawing on what I'd learnt in Tassie for the making side. But it did sort of give me a really strict kind of introduction into furniture design from the kind of Danish point of view, which is great. So I came back broke and decided when Bryan will know this, like when you graduate as an architect, you're still not an architect. You need to practice for 2 years, and then you get what's known as your registration, and then you're officially an architect. So I decided, I'd studied for sort of 7 years to become an architect. Well, 6 years.
Yeah.
I may as well get this registration. So I started working for an architect, but one of the main selling points of working for that particular architect was that his office was above a cabinet maker. So, yeah, and he was a small, really kind of interesting, dynamic office, did really kind of crazy designs, but he was a small practice, so often there wasn't enough work for me to be on full time. So it was kind of the perfect deal where on the low times when I'd be working, say, 2 days a week, I'd be downstairs where I'd subletted a corner of the cabinet maker's workshop and was making furniture. And
who were you making furniture for at that point?
Just for myself, just kind of no one in particular. Didn't have clients. I built a table which I entered into a design competition that the same one that Bryan won in 2015 or 16. You won, Bryan, for Pinch.
The Vivid prize.
So I entered the table.
That's where you built the Fred table?
Yeah, in 2014.
Right, okay.
I won that prize. But
so you built that before you'd had a single furniture client?
Yeah.
Wow.
But the thing is that if you look closely at the table that won, it wasn't great. And it took me 6 months to work out how to build that one table, working evenings. And it was just, what I realized was that I'd been trained how to design in Denmark, and I knew what I wanted it to look like, but I didn't actually have the skills to make it that way. And learning, trying to teach myself.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's a really interesting point that I actually wanted to bring up. And because you and Bryan both so heavily design focused, which is great. Now, there's something that happens here a lot, and certainly in the architecture side of things, where an architect will specify a detail, and then it's just, you builders figure out how to make it. It happens a lot. And I've had it in the furniture realm from designers who've come to me and said, we need 2 of these chairs. This is the sketch. Make it. And I'm like, okay, but have you thought about the details? Like how do you actually want this made? Because from my point of view, this is impossible. So you must have some secret sauce you've thought of to make this joint work. And I'd say 99% of the time they're like, you're the maker, you figure it out. And so it's interesting that you bring that up. Like there's this balance between designing and then actually making, and you're talking about figuring out that whole problem in the same time. Yeah,
and look, I actually think part of what I'm starting to develop as a kind of, I guess, design approach is that when I look at my heroes of furniture making, it's, you look at the classic Dane designers, they were all cabinet makers before they became before they became designers. So they knew how much timber to leave and how much they could take away. And, they kind of knew what they were doing, and you can see it in the design. It's kind of, I don't think they're independent designing and making. Like, I think there's a sort of a reciprocal process that happens. So while you're making something, you're actually thinking about the design, and then once you've got that fluency in the making, when you're designing, you're actually thinking as you're drawing and sketching, how am I going to make this thing?
Exactly.
So it's this sort of dynamic, and yeah, so part of what I'm trying to do is encourage woodworkers to focus on the designing, because I do feel that, when you look at the popular furniture design at the moment, it's very much not made by people who know how to work wood, basically. But to just finish the end of my tale, I'll wrap it up quickly. So I had no idea what I was doing, but I knew how I wanted to look. So I enrolled in an intensive course in Maine, which is the Centre for Furniture Craftsmanship, which is sort of super high-end traditional furniture making. They've got a year-long course there, and I didn't do the year course. I did a 3-month intensive course. So I got a sort of rapid-fire look at the different parts of fine furniture making.
Right.
Came back in 2015, and that's when I sort of set up full-time as a maker in this space, the Victorian Woodworkers Association, which is a not-for-profit that supports young furniture makers. So they offer subsidised spaces. And yeah, look, I've taken on a range of custom commission work and production work, and I've experimented with outsourcing some furniture as well. I think a lot of people have kind of an idea of my practice from Instagram, but the reality is that a lot of my income, I'd say probably 25 to 50% of my income, is coming from architectural practice. So,
Oh, right.
So I do still practice as an architect, and it has made what I do feasible. Like I get contacted by architects on the regular going, how do I quit my job and do what you do? And it's like, don't.
You don't.
So I don't. Yeah. I kind of don't want to mislead anyone to. It is really hard to make a buck doing what I do, and being able to practice as an architect means that I can sort of say no to some jobs that I might otherwise previously would have said yes to. Yeah, so that's sort of my origin story.
Well, I just think it's it's really important that because I was thinking when I was looking at your work, Adam, and I was like, awesome stuff. You must be selling gazillions of these things to be earning a living from it. But like you say, like it's not bringing in by itself a living. And I think so many younger people have this ambition, and I was one of them, that I'm going to be this high-end furniture maker and make 4 or 5 pieces a year. It just doesn't work out that way. Very few people can do that. And the fact that you are supplementing the awesomeness of the design and the fine work with more boring, I guess you would put it in that category, architecture work. For me, I don't have something like that to fall back on. And I think there's a lot of people more in my position where they've got the skills to make things. So I make lots of more boring things, and every now and then I get a really cool commission come through. And so it's the more boring bread and butter stuff that you pump out, boxes with doors on them, and cabinets and stuff like that. And that's what keeps me going. But then I still get the chance to do the odd really fine piece that someone's willing to pay for. I don't think anyone's just doing the fine stuff all day long.
No, and look, there's probably like 5 guys in Australia that you could point at that are doing ultra fine commission-based practice work, and the rest of the people, when you look at them, they have another source of income. I think that there's a real value to doing what you're doing, because it sort of, even though what you describe building boxes as boring, like it keeps up the fluency. And the frustration that I have often, if I've got like a deadline and I'm smashing out drawings for, a month or so, and then I get back into the workshop, I'll make mistakes that I would never have made a month before. You're just like, I can't believe I just did that. And I think when you've got that regular fluency, you don't make those mistakes.
Yeah,
it's a good point.
Keeping your eye on it. I mean, Adam and I had done a presentation at the Wood Dust Festival together, and it was all about how to move from being an emerging maker into a maker.
Right.
And I think the one thing that we fully agreed on was diversification of income streams. And for some people it works better, like you, Joey, to sort of have the kitchens and things like that paying the bills, and for other people sometimes bar work or just completely different work can help. For me, I was actually managing the social media channel of an online business school that my wife was part of. So they saw my social media. They worked out that I was cheaper than a social media firm. So I did that for nearly a year. And I found it so hard to switch between the two, and found that I would then start neglecting my own social media because that was the last thing that I wanted to be on, promoting my business.
Right. Yeah.
Having spent days planning out their feed for the week and videos and making content and all that kind of stuff. So I think there's a fine line between, keeping yourself in the game, but making sure that you're diverse enough that, we're not in the strongest economy at the minute. Like things are tapering a little bit. You're finding people holding on to their money a bit. So if you can diversify into a completely different industry, it really does future-proof you a little bit.
Yeah. So Adam, you've obviously spent a lot of time studying. That's been obviously a lot of your time. Do you feel like that has molded where you've gone with your design process, or do you think that you needed to have that? Like, as someone who doesn't have any design background, is that type of formal study entirely necessary, do you think?
I mean, no, but it does help. These are like I've written a few articles in Wood Review about how I don't think design is something that you're born with or you're not. Like, I really think a lot of woodworkers have this concept that design is this sort of magic thing, and it's just this moment of inspiration. But I really think it's a skill that can be honed. And what design school does is it gives you a tool set in which to tackle problems. It teaches you lateral thinking. You've got to go in every week, show your design to the tutor. It gets absolutely hammered every week. And it's not just to make you feel shit. It's also to make you learn how to stand on your own 2 feet and go, you know what, I disagree. I'm actually going to continue with this process.
That's awesome.
And, the other thing it does is, you study history of design. You understand who the key players are and the key movements. And you get kind of toolkits of how to work as a designer. But, in the same way that you don't need to go to a craft school to learn how to become a fine woodworker, like, you can teach yourself these things. It just requires kind of concerted effort and focus. So the reason why I went to craft schools was because I'd spent, probably a year mucking around in a workshop, making terrible mistakes, not knowing what I was doing and teaching myself. And I realized that, a word of advice can save you weeks of stuffing around.
The reason I asked that question is a couple weeks ago, a couple episodes ago, I should say, Bryan, we were talking about that one of those tables that you did with the dots, and you did the
brass inlays.
The brass inlays. You did the star map at the time of the moon landing, as seen from. And I listened to that story of you telling that, and I just thought, my brain just doesn't. I just don't work that way. And I was talking to my wife the other day, saying that's the process that I want to go through before I design a piece? Now, obviously, I'm a lot younger in my journey than you guys are, but how do I get from I'm just functionally building this Scandi style table because I know that it works to now I'm going to use those design juices without, Adam, like you have gone through all of those that formal training? Is that still possible?
I think now you're thinking about it, like you're challenging yourself. So that's probably the first step in the journey, is realizing that there are other levels to things and that you can build story into pieces. That's definitely something that I would have got through architecture school. I'm not sure if you're the same, Adam, but it's about trying not to post-rationalize your work. It's about having the story drive the design of the piece.
That's a good way to look at it. I like that.
Yeah, and it's sort of like, I often don't come from a narrative in starting point when I'm approaching a piece, and it's sort of about just trying different techniques. So, the reality is that in the initial stages of everyone's design career, our work is super derivative of other designs. Like, if you look at my earlier designs, especially the piece that came out of Hamish's class, it was just a classic Hamish piece. Like, you just got mentors, and you sort of even now I still try different things out. Like, I've recently made a piece with a bit of live edge, and I've never done that before, and always not had a thing for live edge, but I ended up with a live edge piece. So you sort of try things and you learn what you like and what you don't like, and you sort of over time develop your own design language. And it's really nice that when you look at a piece, and when I look at one of Bryan's pieces, I can tell it's by Bryan. It's got a bit of Bryan in it, and other people have described my work similarly. And I think kind of the older you get, the more discreet that design language becomes. But I think it's just something you develop over time.
With you talking about that and you saying Hamish in your work, so for anybody that doesn't know, Adam, I've name dropped it before, but Adam is now the teacher at the Melbourne School of Design, the X Lab there. So it's kind of the modernised version of the course that we did as part of our Masters of Architecture. I think if you go on, I think it's EX_lab. Is that the right Instagram handle?
I should probably know this.
Yes, you should. I'm pretty sure that's it. But if you go on and check out the work, I think it's a really good reflection of the way you teach, that I don't see too much direct Adam Markowitz in the work that your students produce.
Yeah. Look,
I can see that you've taught them and you've challenged them, but I don't necessarily. I think you maybe drive them away from just direct replication, which is a great thing to do as a teacher, because that's the hard way.
Yeah, I guess what we're trying to teach them, and look, the reality with XLab is that it's a course for the Master of Architecture students, so they've had 5 years of design training already. So in a way, they're already trained designers. They've just never made anything before. Right. And if you talk to most architects, they're very frustrated makers. So, you put a drill in their hand and show them how to use it, and they just have the best time. So it's more just giving them guidance. The subject itself is the kind of guiding force behind it is that it's process-driven design. So we want people to experiment with weird and novel processes, just make weird shit, and then look at the kind of piles of goop or concrete or whatever they've been playing with and go, all right, well, what can we do with this? Can we make something functional with this? So I think that's why it's, there's not a linear kind of sense in the same way that Hamish's class, which was very much design a whole piece. That was the brief for Hamish's class.
Because one of the questions that we were talking about before the show was, where does that design process stop and where does it start? So in terms of a simple example, I'm making a table and I want to join some legs. you've talked that you are very heavy into design, so it's all about trying new things, pushing those boundaries. But at some point, like you want to join a leg to a rail, it's a pretty standard thing. Do you find yourself on each one of those steps trying to create something new, or do you just quote unquote give yourself a break from time to time and just pull out the domino and off you go?
I mean, I've got a domino and I'm not afraid to use it.
As a show title.
Really, what the important thing with the design is that you've got a conceptual approach from the get-go that defines, how you're going to tackle this table, but that same conceptual approach should also be bearing on how you resolve a particular joint. So, if you're looking at a table leg and you're doing a minimal Danish table, well, there's a certain reasoning behind how you would do it, The reality is that if you look at most Danish furniture, they would absolutely use the domino. A lot of their stuff is held together with dowels. Most of the chairs are dowel. The fact that if you look at my Fred table, there's an exposed through tenon, wedged through tenon, that I kind of like to run through all of my work. And the thing is that the Danes would never have done that. So, they would have hidden that. They probably still would have done, if it was the strongest joint some of the Danes would have, but as a whole, it would have simplified the design to not have had that. So, exposing it in that way was my own, bringing my own approach to that particular detail. So, there's a good example is this live edge piece, which is a wall unit that I've just finished, and I really, really wanted to have a drawer in it, dovetail drawer, just because I haven't cut a dovetail drawer since I was in Maine, which is 5 years ago. I just haven't had I love cutting dovetails, they're great fun, but I've just never in my work had a situation where I've wanted to put one in. And I designed this piece pretty much around me wanting to do some dovetails. And as I was working through it, I kind of tried it started with sketching, and then I jumped onto Rhino, which is the software I use. And I was drawing away, and I did this iteration that had no drawers, and it just looked so much better with just shelves. And so I made it that way. I couldn't bring myself to actually go back to the drawer thing, even though that was kind of the goal of that particular piece. It just looked better with just shelves.
That's interesting.
So, the key thing is having, design is not the big idea. Design is still resolving all the little details. It's just making sure that when you're resolving those little details, each of the little bits, like even when you're deciding, what the dimension of the roundover is on a particular part, that needs to talk to all the other parts and all the other decisions you've made. So it's sort of a cohesive approach.
Not just a last minute sort of, let me just quickly put a roundover on because that's what everyone does kind of thing. Yeah. Yeah,
and I think that's kind of the error that a lot of people do, is that they'll, they put a roundover on a lot of pieces, so they'll just chuck it on this one, but maybe it's not the most appropriate solution, or, maybe a lesser roundover or a chamfer or no roundover. There's got to be an assertiveness behind each of the decisions that you've made.
This is probably a question for Bryan as well as Adam, but listening to you talking about design, I'm interested in whether you're just constantly looking forward, or are you looking back at what has happened before and taking inspiration and then bringing it forward? I guess I'm asking because, I always feel my design flair or my interest is in older things. I really love what the French were doing in the 18th century, and how the heck they were doing it. And I can't, like, it's so difficult what they were doing with the tools they had. And for me, I almost feel like a constant feel of imposter syndrome, like calling myself a furniture maker, and I don't know how to do this stuff. And and so a lot of my designs, I'm like trying to go back and like incorporate aspects of what used to be done, just to figure out how the hell they did it and incorporate it into their work. And I'm wondering if there's any thought process like that, or you guys just don't look back, let's go forward with what the modern shapes and designs.
For me, I would say I'd like to think that I'm always looking forward, but there's definitely parts of my education which look backwards. So I studied in Glasgow, which is parts of it were, post-war reconstruction. It's pretty heavy concrete brutalist buildings, which are all very cold and mostly falling apart because they were so poorly built. But I was always interested in the form of them. So there's definitely brutalist work which has influenced my work. But I think the fortunate thing about timber is it's obviously easy to soften those forms. And, it might be, it might be an overarching theme in my furniture, but it's softer through textures, through turning solids into slats and things like that. It's very easy to take that and make it not more acceptable, but just more, every time you see a brutalist building that's listed, heritage listed, like the uproar of people is pretty huge. We've got a beautiful one just down the road in Footscray, part of an old hospital. And I mean, there are people campaigning outside it to bulldoze it, and then there's people campaigning to go, it's the best piece of work that's left in Australia. So I don't know. I just find that, if you take that design thinking and apply it to something like furniture or sculpture, it's not as big and it's not as grey, so therefore it's easier for people to accept. And it's not quite as permanent, you can move a piece around. It's not fixed to that spot for the next 100 years.
So I guess you're kind of using those old world techniques that Joey was talking about, but because you're using a different material in this instance, it's got a similar feel, but it's also got a very different feel, potentially modern feel. Yeah.
I'll tell you who I think is really good at looking back at the past and moving into the future is Bern Chandley. So, he knows how to make a traditional Windsor chair. He's gone and learned how to do it, and I think that's where there is a real value. He wouldn't be able to do what he's doing unless he knew how to make those traditional chairs. But, those traditional chairs, especially with the kind of ornate turnings and, all the little details on it, they're beautiful, but, I don't know if I'd want one in my house. They just, they can feel a little bit stuffy, some of them. So, I mean, they're beautiful objects. But you look at them, what Bern's doing, and he's kind of looking at the past, but he's also got a kind of modernist aesthetic, which he's bringing to it, and he's sort of taking it somewhere new. And he's experimenting with materials and playing with sort of like brass stretches and different details and stripping it back. And, he doesn't have the ornate little turnings. It's all quite sleek and streamlined. And, I'd love to have a Bern Chandler rocker in my house one day, So I think that's a good example of how you can both look at historical references and, not just be a historical reenactment.
That's Assegai light, Adam.
Yep.
As a South African, obviously I immediately picked up on that.
Yeah.
Where did the design idea for that come from?
It's funny. Both my parents are South African.
Right. Okay.
So I picked your accent straight away. Most Aussies have got no idea how to pronounce that. They'll call me up on the phone,
what do they say?
And they go, I'm just inquiring about the Assegi. And it's like, but look, it actually, the inspiration for that actually came from, I think I was somewhere in Europe a long time ago looking at, I think I was in Spain somewhere, and I was looking at these sort of very early muskets. And the way the timber is sculpted, it's just so, I really like playing with curvature in my work, and I really like it when, if people describe my work as like bone-like, I feel like I've done a good job.
All right.
So, you just look at it and it's just so organic and sumptuous, and it just is designed to fit in the human body. And if you need to put out of your mind for a second that these things are designed for putting holes in people. But they're beautiful objects. So that was the starting point of that particular design, just the relationship between steel and wood and how it came together and the organic shapes. And I made the thing, and my mum said, that looks like an assegai. And I'm like, that's a good name. So,
and then no one could pronounce it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just such a striking piece, because it's just, especially from our level, it's just a slit. It's such a cool design. I really like that.
Yeah, it's the hard thing about it is that it's really hard to photograph.
Right.
Because it just sort of disappears, and I've had it in a few. It's probably at this point my best-selling product, and it does go in architectural spaces, and they shoot it, and you can't see it. It just disappears. And it's what's really nice about it is that it's got this double taper, and I've built this sort of tapering router jig that allows me to create the shape where it's sort of tapering on two axes, and you only really experience it in person. You can't. It's really hard to photograph.
I was going to say, does it have a completely different feel, obviously, in person then? I mean, you don't obviously... Does it disappear to your eye as well, depending where you are in the room, or...?
I hope not. People definitely respond to it better in person than they do in photographs. Definitely.
You can see it in... what was the movie, Adam?
Like Reload or I'll
I can't remember either. There was a sci-fi movie that was shot in Melbourne, and they sourced a lot of locally made stuff.
Okay.
That's really bad. I can't remember the name of it either.
So
but yeah,
it was actually sourced to be on the show. It wasn't just per chance that it was there.
No. They sourced some of my stuff, some of Adam's.
I was going to say, wasn't your pinch bench in a movie? Is it the same one?
Very briefly in a fight scene. Upgrade, that's the one. Upgrade.
Was it the same movie though?
Same movie, yeah. Right. Yeah. Mine was in the bad guys lair, and Adam's was in the good guys lair. Yeah. But it looks beautiful in there.
So Adam, if people want to see more of your stuff, where do they go? Obviously, you've got Instagram and a website. How can people find you?
Yeah, that'd be the best. Probably Instagram is what updates a lot, and I'm big on stories because I can put stupid things up and they go away. So I keep the stories updated pretty well. I don't really post all that often. And I haven't updated my website in years, but there's a good. That's I think where most of my customers find me, I'd say.
Okay, so your Instagram, I'm just pulling it up here so I can get it right, is Markowitz Designs. That's MARKOWITZ Design. So check that out. And then obviously your website's Markowitz Design as well, isn't it?
Yeah, .com, no AU.
So go check out Adam, because some of the stuff that I saw on Instagram, that one of those, it's that lamp. It's probably one of the newer posts. Was that a design of yours as well? It's like a C shape.
Yeah.
Yeah, so capital C. That one.
Yeah, that one was steam bent. So I actually used a jig that Bern had posted on his Instagram, a sort of steam bending jig. So it was steam bent, air dried spotted gum, and then I put it on the table saw and cove cut it, which was super gnarly.
Pretty hairy. Yeah.
Cove cutting's where you kind of go diagonally to the blade to cut the profile, and then sort of hand carve the outside. So it's got this sort of, if you cut through it, it would have a kind of crescent profile. And what's cool about it is that it's probably only about 3 mil thick, but it's super rigid. But the problem with it was that the whole conceptual idea was that when you steam bend stuff, it springs back. And then it was going to have a vertical cable that held the globe. And then as the steam bent timber sprung back, it was going to hold the cable in tension. So you'd be able to sort of pluck it like a guitar string.
Right.
And that was working really well until I cove cut it. And then it was springing back. And as soon as I cove cut it, it started closing in. So I think somehow by removing the material on the backside, I changed
Took a bit of tension out.
Yeah, and it actually closed down. So the chord's actually really floppy.
Turned into a bass guitar.
Yeah.
You just need to put a really thin tube in there and run the cable inside like a steel tube, and
the thought crossed my mind.
Either way,
Robin, the other project of his that you should really check out is the Mobius Chair. That's the one you did in Copenhagen, right, Adam?
Yep.
Yeah, because Robin's
Why does that name sound so familiar?
You might have seen
it's been, well, firstly, if you Google it, it's Metron's chair. Metron, the comic book character. So
Right.
that's the first thing that came up. But yeah, it's done the rounds on social media. It's been
maybe that's where.
reposted a million times. I get inquiries onto sort of to get them made from all around the world, but it's so labour intensive that when I quote them a price, I've never had someone come back and go, "Yep, I'm going to get one of those."
Do you have the molds for it still?
No. And to be honest, the way I did it in Copenhagen, like, I had very limited facilities there, so it's not the best way. And I've had a crack at a number of different ways to try and make it, and I still haven't nailed down a quick, efficient, good way to make it.
Nothing about it looks quick.
Yeah. I'd love to set it. Look, it'd take me probably 2 months to nut it out, I think, and I just don't have that sort of time to contribute to it. But I'd love to have the space to actually spend a bit of time to resolve it properly.
Yeah. Where's the original one?
It's sitting in a corner at my mum's place. Yeah. It's classic when you think of these sort of fine design blogs posting photos of it, and I know where it's actually sitting.
Wasn't it? It was in Vogue, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Wow.
Some a really good photographer borrowed it for a photo shoot, so there's photos of like models draped all over it. It's pretty funny.
That's amazing. All right, so everyone listening, go and check out Adam's work. Clearly, as we've all just heard, there's some pretty high-profile stuff there, even if it is sitting in Mum's room somewhere.
The dirty secrets. Don't. My advice to everyone is don't believe the Instagram smokescreen.
Yeah.
All right, so to everyone listening, I hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, please go ahead and give it a rating on iTunes. That really does help us out. The Shop Stool Podcast is available on iTunes and most other podcast apps, as well as YouTube. So Adam, thanks very much for coming on the show. We really did appreciate hearing your story. Thanks very much for sharing it. My name is Robin Lewis. Joey and Brian, thanks for hanging out today. Take care, everyone, and we will see you in the next one.
See ya.
See you later.
Thanks for having me.